like to welcome everybody out. My name is Gary Fredricks with WSU Extension, and I don't get to take such a relaxed position today since I'm the speaker. But as always, I always like to let people know that if you would like to look at past presentations, we do record presentations. Get a copy of this one, or if there's ever a presentation that comes up in the future, you can email me at garyf@wsu.edu, and you should see that on your screen in front of you. Go ahead and send a message to me saying, I'd like this past presentation, and they're all on a website, and I'll give note to Alice. Alice does all the hard work, and I get to take the glory. But Alice has assembled those and done a great job of all the presentations. We've done over 50 presentations this year so far. So there's a variety of topics and a lot of information out there. In terms of August is right around the corner. It is hard to believe, but it is. We're still staying with the format Tuesdays at noon. In September, we'll expand that format into Wednesdays at 6 o'clock. But next week, controlling the top 10 noxious weeds, and Jennifer Mendoza is our noxious weed board coordinator, and just lots of information. Landscaping for wildlife, tending the garden, saving seeds, and growing garlic. So some really worthwhile topics to finish off this summer, and hopefully that you can join us for some of those. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing this screen. And, okay, where's my other one at? That's strange. Okay. I've got to go find my presentation. I thought it was ready, but...
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
There it is. Okay. Well, I had two of them up, and I think that's why I had so much problem.
Okay, we see it.
Thanks, Alice. Maintaining your lawn during the summer, and some of you have seen me do lawn talks, and I'm sorry to say it probably won't be quite all that different, but there are some things to talk about. So, you know, I used to always start off with the slide that says, do I want the perfect yard? But really, when we talk about the summer, it's really, do I want a green yard? Because that really does depend upon what is it that you want? Do you want the perfect yard? Do you want it green and lush, no weeds and all that kind of stuff? Or you go, you know, I don't care if I have a couple of dandelions out there, and if it gets a little bit of brown grass out there, you know, when the water comes back, it'll be just fine. Those things will make a difference. So, you know, we see those people, and it's usually my neighbor that looks like this. It's not my neighbor, but, you know, a nice green yard and everything looks tended and everything. And my wife looks at me like, you know, how come we can't have something like that? And I go, well, I don't have a good excuse. But, you know, this is a nice green yard, a little bit unkept, but, you know, you can have a green yard with a little less maintenance. This is probably how my yard is going to look in a couple of months, or at least in a month. You know, nice and brown, and, you know, you have a little green spot there because there's a weed growing, but that's typically about it. Or you can go with this type of garden, which may not be green, but it certainly is maintenance free, and you don't have to worry much about gardening or anything. So all kinds of different ways that we can have our yard and that. So let's start off with looking at our yard and especially the grass. Grass goes down. We look at the root system. I think I really want to talk about that. Roots don't go down that far. As you can see here, you know, just a couple of inches. So when we talk about watering, you know, we really are just kind of hitting the top of the plant, top of the soil, and surface watering. So not that big of a deal. We also look at what grass does. And, of course, in the spring, we're mowing every week. And if you're not mowing every week, then you're picking up you're raking the yard to try and get it off the lawn and everything. So we're mowing every week. Then we come down in the summer, and even this seems to be an abundance of grass. Right now, we haven't seen much water for most of June, July, and August is always dry. And so I don't suspect we're going to see hardly any water at all. So from the standpoint, this is when your grass goes dormant. And your grass is going to go dormant. It's not going to grow. It's not going to do much. If you're watering it, you can keep it green if that's your desire. But you'll see that as the fall comes in and time comes back, then the grass is going to have that little bit of bump, go forward, and then it's going to drop off where as it gets cold, it's not going to do much of anything. So I'm going to start asking some questions because I like to do that. And let's see, I need to go through. So I just want you to do question number 1. What is the most important thing you can do to maintain your lawn? And it's an anonymous poll. Hopefully everybody sees that in front of them. I haven't seen anybody use it, but do you want to water it, mow it, fertilize it, weed it, or replace the lawn with a rock garden? And I don't see anybody using the poll yet. Is anybody, Alice, do you see the poll out there?
I see the poll, but we can't vote.
Wow.
It's the results. Yes, we're viewing the questions, but we can't do anything with it.
Huh. They've developed a new
answer all the
system
questions and then submit it.
There's mine's
I see
dead.
what the problem is because I put all the ones on the same question. It's probably I did it different this year. Okay, well then we won't worry about questions then. The questions are coming through a little bit different on the poll. So what's the most important thing? You just have to do the poll on your own. Water it, mow it, fertilize it, weed it, or replace it with a rock garden. I think most of you would rather replace it with the rock garden, and then you don't have to argue with your teenager. But mowing it is the most important thing you can do to your yard, and especially maintaining it from weeds, keeping track of it, and things like that. And this nice green yard, we usually try and go with the 1 through 3rd rule. And that means you never take more than 1/3 of the grass off. When you start doing that, you start damaging the grass. And we'll talk about a little further what happens when we damage the grass. I've got some pictures on that. So, but try not to take 1/3 of the grass. And what happens is if I don't mow for 2 weeks or 3 weeks and it gets really, really tall, then I go through and I don't have any choice because I don't have that big setting that's going to take care of that. So if I'm mowing it probably about once a week, I'm probably pretty close to this 1/3 rule. Right now, I think all I'm doing is just knocking down dandelions in my yard. So how high should I set the mower cut? I'll let you think about that for a second. Do I want it on its lowest setting, middle setting, and highest setting? And I think sometimes we think, well, if we cut it on the lowest setting, then I don't have to mow it as often. But, you find it doesn't always work that way. So your highest setting. So why do we want to set it on the highest setting? You can see these two people's yards. And on one yard, he cut it on the lowest setting. You see the second person, he cut it on the higher setting. And what happens on the lower setting is you tend to scalp the grass. You tend to take more of it, but you tend to scalp it and you keep it close to the ground. There's going to be some problems with in terms of length. It's going to allow more sunlight to hit that ground. And so if you have some weeds in there, they're going to be popping up. Hopefully that's not the case because you don't see a lot of weeds on this one, but you do see it starting to turn brown. Whereas on the highest setting, it tends to keep it a little bit greener. Now, I recognize that during the summer, and you're not watering the grass, there is a point where just because it's on the highest setting, you're not going to be able to keep it green. But you're going to be able to probably have it stay more lush and green on the higher setting than the lower setting. And once you take that highest setting and you're still cutting every week, you're going to find it doesn't really generate that much more grass. It doesn't generate that much more work. And what you find is this grass over here on this side, again, has more weeds. It tends to use a lot more water. The lower we cut the grass, the more it just really needs to generate and get itself more nutrients and tends to take more water. Where if we have this higher grass on the other side, it tends to act a little more as a buffer, and that sunlight doesn't dry out the ground as much, so it tends to hold the water a little bit better, doesn't tend to turn as brown. So more height is a really big deal. Do I need to water my yard? And it really depends. Now this grass, yes, it could probably use some water. We see some water, and I think what he's doing is he's washing off his sidewalk, and that's what's getting the little bit of green that's on the side here, and a little bit of runoff that's coming down. But for the most part, so what happens when you get this brown grass? Well, your teenager's happy because he doesn't have to mow the grass. But is this going to come back? It will. It will come back. The problem will be is, number one, this guy down in the corner who has an ice cream grass, he's kind of laughing at you a little bit because you have brown grass. But the other thing is, as this grass starts to go brown, it does allow for a little bit of weeds. And so if we can leave this really lush and a little bit taller, you're not going to have the weed problem with it. But it will come back. It's just dormant right now, and you will lose a little bit of it, but not much. So it depends on whether you want to water or not. If you decide to water, how much do you need to water? 1 inch per week, 1 inch twice a week, 1 inch every other day, or when you see water form puddles on the ground, which isn't hard when the ground is this dry. So I'll let you think about that for a second. And you're going to want to water about 1 inch per week. Well, the real question is, how do you know? And if you get a tuna fish can and put it out there under your sprinkler system, it's going to tell you how much water. So if I've got this sprinkler system right here that pops up and everything, put a couple of cans out there, turn it on for half an hour, and really see how much water is going. The other part of this is the timing. When do we want to water? We want to water when the sun's not out at its highest because we get a lot more evaporation. So if I'm watering early when it's a little bit cloudy or a little bit cooler in the morning or later on at night, it's going to retain that water a whole lot more. Versus if I'm watering in the middle of the afternoon, I'm not going to get as much water. It's going to get evaporation quite a bit more, and you're not going to get as much. And you see these different systems here, probably the handheld. You know, we get a really good feeling when we're watering plants and we're using a handheld. I can tell you that your patience for watering plants is probably not as good as you think. And you think, man, I've watered that plant, I've dosed it down. Not a lot of water is getting down to that plant, and probably not as much as getting down to the ground. You don't want to soak all the leaves and everything. You want to get it down to the root system. But it takes a while to really get water to plants in the lawn. The system that goes back and forth, again, set a couple of cans out there, but you'll find that plant, those plants that get closer to the sprinkler system get more water than those on the edges. Your kids will have a good time with it. They're going to be running through the sprinkler and have fun with it, but it's not going to water evenly, not like some of these other systems. Will it help to fertilize? No, the grass is going to do just as well without it. Yes, it makes me look better than my neighbors, especially that guy down in the corner. Yes, it helps to control weeds. No, it's not cost effective. Why am I putting a lot of money into fertilizer when it just means that I have to mow it more often. So let you look at this and see, why is the best reason to fertilize? Carrie hopefully has an answer. And the main reason is to control weeds. And we talked about keeping a nice, healthy, lush lawn, even if it's brown out there. And if you're not watering, you're probably not going to want to fertilize because you need something to take that fertilizer down to the roots. It'll just sit on top of the grass. So if it's not raining out there and you're not watering, you probably don't want to fertilize. It's not going to do the thing. And so that's where the cost effectiveness comes in. Yes, you're going to be mowing it, but it's going to help keep the weeds. It's going to help healthier plant. If we're eating healthy foods and everything like that versus my teenager, he's eating potato chips and snacks and cake and ice cream and all those things. I'm going to be probably a little healthier than him. And so we want to treat it right. And just how much more lush it is. And that's what is going to make it a lot thicker. And of course, I use my crowded elevator example, is that as it gets thicker, if we have a crowded elevator, and these teenage kids think, God, I wonder how many kids we can get in that elevator. And so they're all just packing in there and packing in there. And finally they get not one more person can come in. It's like that way with a nice lush lawn. You've got these weed seeds that are being dropped by birds in different areas, blown in from the neighbor's yard and that type of thing. And they're sitting there, and they will stay around for 20 years once they hit the ground. But if you have so much grass and so lush, it won't let one more seed germinate because it's taking up all the water. Somebody has to come out of the elevator for somebody else to go in, and it's that way. So when we have this lush lawn that looks like the one at the bottom, we see something that just is not going to let those weed seeds germinate and everything. Versus the lawn over here where it's getting more sparing, it's getting shorter, it's probably being undermowed a little bit, and it's going to allow some of those weeds to pop up. So let me talk about NPK. So when we go to the store, we see a bag of fertilizer, and it has 3 numbers on it. The first one's nitrogen, which is the N. The second one's phosphorus, and the third one's potassium. Now, nitrogen is going to come up, and it's going to really green up the leaves. When you look at Miracle-Gro, it's really high nitrogen. Nitrogen comes in, and it really affects the top half of that plant. Things tend to bloom, they tend to grow, they tend to really nap, but nitrogen is going to green up the top half of the plant. The problem with nitrogen is it's really water soluble. And so if that plant is dormant, and I made the supposition, if I go out and I decide to spread fertilizer on Christmas Day, kids are playing with toys, so I'm out in the afternoon, I'm putting fertilizer out there, those plants really aren't taking it up because the colds come in and they're not growing. And it's going to rain, if not then in the next week, and that nitrogen is going to be gone. And so you want to make sure we're putting fertilizer on a time, especially from a nitrogen standpoint, that plant is actively growing and going to take it up. Now, the phosphorus really focuses itself on the roots. And with that roots, what it will do is and the potassium tends to focus itself not only on the roots, but kind of the circulatory system of the thing. And I've got it here. Nitrogen affects the top half, phosphorus the bottom half, and potassium all around. But phosphorus and potassium tend to bind with the soil. So if we put phosphorus and potassium on the soil, they tend to stay there. They tend not to go away. So nitrogen doesn't hang around very long. Phosphorus and potassium, they'll stay there and are less likely to float away. So the next one I have, and Alice, I'm assuming you can still hear me?
Yes.
Alice?
Yep, I can hear you.
Question number 5, what kind of fertilizer do I need? So the NPK, a 12-12-12, a 12-4-6, or a 6-4-12? and we'll see what we come up with. There we go. So chances are you're going to want a 12-4-6. We're going to want something that's high in the nitrogen. The phosphorus and potassium, not so much, because it's probably adequate levels in the ground from those fertilizers or from anything that's gone on the ground. So, you know, a little bit of phosphorus and potassium, not much of a problem. And you're going to find that your flowers, your shrubs are the same way. They're going to always need some kind of nitrogen, and it's going to tend to be higher. Not so much, again, with the phosphorus potassium. If you want to be sure, you can always take a soil test, but that's what I find. I also wanted to come up with the question, what does 12-12-12 mean? And is that the same thing as a 6-6-6? So if I have 100 pounds of fertilizer, and it's a 12-12-12, that means I have 12 pounds of nitrogen, 12 pounds of phosphorus, and 12 pounds of potassium in it. So if I have a 6-6-6, that means I have 6 pounds of phosphorus, 6 pounds of potassium, 6 pounds of nitrogen. I have half as much, which means I have to spread twice as much fertilizer to get this amount, the 12-12-12. Now, if the 6-6-6 is really, really cheap, maybe it's worth it to me. But that's really the only difference, is how much is in there. You're going to find the ones with the lower numbers tend to be a little bit cheaper. If they're really cheap, well, again, maybe that's something you want to look at to save a few dollars that way. What's the difference between chemical and organic? Chemical is going to be your Miracle-Gro. And it's like Alka-Seltzer. You throw it and, boy, you see the bubbles. You use Alka-Seltzer. It's up and bubbling. That's ready for that plant to take up right now. And that plant will take it up and use it. And that's the advantage of chemical. Couple weeks later, maybe some phosphorus, potassium left over, the nitrogen's going to be gone. It's just not there. Whereas when we look at the organic, it's usually all that nitrogen and phosphorus, potassium, a lot of those minerals, they're bound up in these complex molecules. And bacteria and earthworms and molds and everything else, as they work through the dirt, they tend to break that down and make it available to the plant. So the organic is right at kind of a slow release over time. So you don't get the full benefit of it the first year, but there's going to be some left the second year and the third year. So the organic is just a very slow release, where the chemical is, man, I'm seeing results now. But you're not going to get a lot of residual. What's the best time to fertilize? Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day, and Thanksgiving. And when we look on a map, and I have to thank Alice for getting me this map, if we have a high maintenance land, you can see those times where we're fertilizing. We want to break it up into 4 applications. And applications, each one's going to be about 1 pound nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. Maybe a little bit more if we really feel like it needs it. However, if we're going down and we go, man, I don't really want my lawn to grow that much. I want to give a little fertilizer. Probably give it in the spring around Labor Day, coming through and hitting it that way. And then following up, you can follow up in September, October. So that's the optional one. And what you would do is divide it that way. So instead of giving it 4 times, I'm going to give it twice. I'm using the same amount. I'm just using it less times. Early spring, the problem is it's rainy. Yeah, the nitrogen doesn't stay along. You just don't get the advantage. And if it's cold, and a lot of times it is, it's wet and cold, you don't see that plant taking up. So I would say any time before May it's too early. Don't want to go early spring. It's just not going to use the fertilizer like you want it to. Why should I leave grass clippings and not rake my lawn? Well, I don't want to really argue with my teenager to get it raked, unless it's pulled behind my riding mower, and I don't have one of those anymore. It's not happening. The grass will act as a mulch and keep the moisture in the ground. The cut grass will fertilize the lawn. And I need to rake my lawn so it looks better than neighbor. There's my neighbor again. He's got the perfect yard. Drives me nuts. So what do we think? Which one do we like the best? Why am I not raking? Well, the real reason is because that grass will fertilize the lawn. Do not think that number 2 will act as a mulch and keep the moisture in the ground. If it's that thick that it's probably acting as a mulch, it's also probably killing the grass underneath it. If you've ever had, and you go out there, man, I haven't cut my grass for 3 weeks, and I go out there and it's really heavy and you let it go for a while, you're going to see the grass start to die under it. Then you've got some other problems. And if you can, and this gets back to mowing your grass. If you're going to mow it every week and you can leave your grass on the lawn, it will cut your fertilizer costs by 40%. It really does keep those nutrients back. And again, this grass is like organic. It's going to be a slow release. It's going to release those minerals and back into the grass and help keep it real healthy. So it's saving you money. What is the best ways to control weeds? And there's several right answers on this one. So water, mow, fertilizer, spray, or I don't really care about my weeds. I'm just going to let them grow. So what do we think? Well, if you've been watching, you can see there's only one that I really are kind of opposed to, and that's spraying weed killer. Even for some of us, if I have one dandelion out there, I don't really care. I'm not going to be too concerned about that. So let's talk about herbicides. We have the glyphosates, the Roundup, and when you look on the active control, it's glyphosate. When we look on some of these other weed killers, you see this 2,4-D amine weed killer. And when we talk about the active ingredients, because that's what I'm interested in, dimethylamine salt of 2,4, and it's a really long name. I'm just going to remember 2,4-D. 2,4-D is going to kill the broadleaves. It's going to kill your dandelions and the thistles and the clover and different things like that. It's not going to harm the grass. So 2,4-D is what you're looking for. If you have, in fact, this happened to me this time. I had a couple of dandelions because I didn't care about it, and the neighbor didn't like it, and so he came over and he sprayed my yard with Roundup on the dandelions. And what's interesting is, yes, it killed the dandelions underneath, but it made this big hole of grass, of bare ground, and I had more dandelions come up because there was bare ground there. So it didn't solve the problem. So not only does it not really help you because it creates this, but it still doesn't get rid of your weeds in a long time. You don't want to use a glyphosate or a Roundup product on your lawn. It doesn't solve the problem. It just makes it worse. If you have to spray, think about a 2,4-D product. Now, this is not going to kill the quackgrass or the other grasses. It's just going to kill the broadleaf. So when you're using herbicides, the best way to do a spot spray. Take a backpack sprayer. Don't spray the whole lawn. Doesn't need it. It's not going to be good that way. Read the label and find out what the label says. Don't overspray. If you have spray that's running off your yard because you've sprayed so much, and right now with the ground so dry, it doesn't really absorb as much. And you can get that spray, and it's going to spray down, or it's going to drip down the sidewalk, run down, and run into your neighbor's flower bed. And not a good thing. Apply only to active growing plants. If they're not growing, not going to work. Spray on a clear day. And again, if it's a little cooler in the mornings, is a good thing. Don't apply in the rain. The rain just tends to wash it off. For most 2,4-D products, you don't want to mow your grass within 2 days. So let that grass come up, let it be growing for a little bit, and you don't want to use it on new lawns. Some of these 2,4-Ds, they're going to have some other chemicals in there, and they can make the grass just a little bit sick. And for new lawns, that can really hammer it. Again, you got one dandelion. I don't care about one dandelion. Something like this, mowing and everything, is not going to get rid of these dandelions. You're going to have to, if you really hate dandelions, it's kind of late. You're going to have to come up with a spray. And so think about it. When is the best time to spray these? When they're actively growing, probably in the spring or the late fall. During the summer is not a really good time. You don't get the kill. You don't tend to hurt the weeds as much. So spring or fall is a better time. But right now, if I really want to get rid of these weeds, I maybe get a 30, 40% kill on this. I'm going to have a lot of weeds coming up later on. And again, I talked about what sprays can do. Look at this grass right here in the middle where it's got that tinge to it. You know, we thought we'd go ahead and spray, and yeah, it's killing some of the grass, but it's certainly not helping some of the others, and it's making them sick too. So again, be careful your sprays. Really have a handle on your spray before you go out there and do that. There's so many other things you can do that won't cost you anything, and it's just much healthier for the grass. Moss. Mow closer to the ground, use moss killer, leave it alone, water less often. What's the best way to kill moss? Well, just leave it alone. Moss grows because it gets a lot of sunlight. It's because you've been mowing your ground too close. So if you mow too close, you're probably going to see more moss. You'll see it in the winter too, because the grass isn't growing. There's a lot of open space out there. But as the sun comes out, and especially right now, you're not going to see a lot of moss out there because the sun is so much, it's dried out that moss and killed it. Don't spend a lot of money on moss killer. Let your grass grow a little bit taller, and that will take care of the moss. And again, something like this, it's not going to survive all this sunlight. It's going to dry it out. It's going to kill it. And the moss isn't killing the grass. You've got a poor lawn here, and that's why you've got so much moss. It just needs more grass. The grass needs to be taken care of better. And let's see. Okay, something's going on with my slides here. And won't let me advance.
You're in you're not in presentation view. There you go.
Okay, that better? So I was going to talk about thatch. I'm not going to go back. But basically thatch is that dead grass underneath. Do you need to thatch? You know, kind of look through your lawn. If you could see it, you see a little bit of ground down there and everything like that. That thatch is going to break down over time, and that's fertilizer. But if it gets really, really thick, it's going to kind of provide a barrier between the moisture. It's going to act like that mulch. It's not going to be as healthy as you think. And so if I've really got a lot of thatch in there, then I have a problem. And a lot of this is because I didn't mow for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, mowed again. I picked it up, but there's still a lot of grass in there. And it's because I'm not mowing as often. Typically, though, you don't necessarily have to thatch. And then aerate. Do you have to aerate? Not necessarily. And you want to probably do this when the ground's a little softer. What you're doing is if your grass isn't doing really well, you can follow up with this and put some air in the ground. It just provides a little healthy. But do you have to do this? No. And these pellets, yeah, you probably should try and rake some of them up. They will, if you don't like how unsightly they are, they will break down and they will feed themselves back in the lawn. So it's not so bad, but it's going to be a little bit unsightly for a while. So in review, and then we'll get into our questions. If you've got a high maintenance lawn, you can see we're mowing all the time, and you probably should be mowing weekly. Fertilizer, we talked about the 4 times. You're going to be watering when it's hot out there, and that's really up to you. But if you've got an awful lot on your lawn, it really requires a lot. Aerated and dethatching, only if it's over 3/4 inches. So if you got an inch of thatch down there that's really getting thick, that's when you probably want to do that. And overseeding, only if I'm seeing bare ground. Otherwise, I'm not worried too much about overseeding. Minimum. So I got a medium input. I kind of want to take care of it. Again, I'm mowing. I'm fertilizing once. I'm kind of watching the water. I want to keep it green, and some of these other ones. And then the low one. And this would probably be me. I'm mowing probably right now. I'm mowing once every 2 weeks because, again, I'm just knocking the heads off the dandelions. My grass might mow. I might fertilize it probably come September, though I'd rather do it in early spring. I'm not putting a lot of water on my lawn right now. It's probably going to go brown, which means that I may have to watch weeds at another time. Aerating it may be something that I want to follow up next year, depending on how the grass comes on. If it comes off the winter and looks pretty good, the overseeding, you won't have to worry about thatching, and aeration probably isn't a big deal. So low input, again, mowing it as it needs it, probably weekly, especially during the spring and fall. A little bit of fertilizer maybe once during the year. And if it's really, really dry, we may want to apply some water to it. But it depends on how big your yard was. Before I moved to Longview, I used to have an acre and a half of lawn. And so I wasn't big on irrigating it because that was a chore. It just wasn't something I could do. I know it was going to go brown. It would come back. I also know that it was going to let a little bit of weed in there, and I was okay with that. The fertilizing helped compensate for some of that, keeping that ground healthy and that grass going. So, and here's just a calendar. And for those of you that look at the presentation, you can see that it just summarizes all the things that we saw on the last slide. So with that, that's all, folks. That's all I have. I'm looking for questions. So I'm going to stop sharing. Questions, please. And,
I have one.
Okay, please.
I have, I don't know if it's more than an acre and a half, but we live on 2.5 acres with a house and a shop. And we don't water. We just let the rain water. But in has blown cat's paw or cat's ear, whatever that stuff's called. And our neighbor is mowing the lawn for us. And it seems like it's just spreading it. Do you have to dig them individually? And if you do, and you don't get the root, does that just make it spread?
I believe with cat's paw, that's probably correct. And it may be that you're going to want to come back with a spray. And again, that may not be your option, but over time, that's what happens when weeds. That's the problem with not watering during the summer. That grass goes dormant. The weeds kind of get a stronghold because there's little patches of ground. And then when they come on, there's nothing to really drive them away. And weeds outcompete grass, unfortunately.
Yeah. So how do I control it? It's taking over.
Yeah, then I would have to, and this is Midge. Midge, you would put your email address in the chat box. I will make sure I take it off, and I will get back to you on that.
Oh, good. Thank you.
You're welcome. One, for massive dandelion population, wouldn't it be better to renovate and replace rather than use an herbicide? That's true, but that also costs a certain amount of money also. And so it depends. If you have a management problem, let's say, I'm only mowing once a month and I let it grow really tall and I'm not watering it and I don't ever put fertilizer on it. And so I go out there and replace my lawn. The fact that I've misused that lawn and I'm still going to misuse it, the dandelion problem is going to come back. And I've had people replant their lawns 3 and 4 times. It seems like a lot of money and a lot of work. I'm not a big fan of herbicides, but again, making sure you take care of the grass is going to keep the dandelions and all those other things out there. And if you do, again, spot spraying, a couple of them, and just hitting the weeds themselves will help do that. Recommendation for type of grass. You're going to find the fescues do really, really good. They tend to stay greener. They're very, very drought tolerant. Find out what's recommended through your lawn dealer. If the young kid that's 18 years old comes up to you in Home Depot, he's not the guy that you want to talk to. Go to a shop that deals with grass seed and ask them some questions and find out what works good in your area. What's going to be drought tolerant? What's going to keep that green? Because some grasses will stay green a lot longer and don't need quite the watering of them. For clumpy lawns, do you recommend fertilizing, reseeding, or both to get it smooth? It's probably because of the fertilizing. Some areas are fertilizer, especially if you have animals. I have a big dog, and some of my lawn is green and lush, and some of it is not. If I want to, and I kind of understand that because he's selectively fertilizing it. If you've got those clumpy lawns, yes, fertilizing it evenly will help do that, and then just keeping it mowed will help get it smoother and do that. You may have some different varieties of grass out there. So I've got some grasses that grow a lot more bunch, a lot more thicker. You have some other varieties that are just a little more thin and don't do that. And that may be the clumpiness too. And again, whether you fertilize or not, that's not gonna change it. I have, for a dormant lawn, should the 1 inch per month be applied all at once or weekly? That's a really good question. If you water more times during the week, so I've got 1 inch, so I'm watering a 1/2 inch twice a week, or I'm averaging 1/3 of an inch 3 times a week. It's going to be easier on the lawn. You're going to have to water it less. It's going to be a better situation. So the more times you're watering means the shorter time you're watering, you'll get more that water will go to the plant. So if I'm putting the one water on once a week, some of that water is going to go on the ground and going to be lost. If I'm putting it on twice a week at a 1/2 inch, more of that water is going to go to the plant. So it just depends on your schedule and what you want to do. But watering more times per week less is going to be beneficial, and you're going to use less water.